is BioPhoenix here, and today we're going to be taking a look at a Super Nintendo game, and that happens to be Smart Ball, or what it's called in Japan is Jerry Boy. And it was developed by Game Freak and System Psycom, and published by Sony ImageSoft. And it was released in 1992, making it a pretty early Super Nintendo game. And yet again, this is also another action platformer. So as always, first things first, let's talk about the story, and believe it or not, in the English version of this game, there's actually no story whatsoever. Yeah, Sony decided to take out quite a few things from the English version of this game, not just the story, but they even took out like the towns that happen between levels. Which in one way kinda sucks, but in another way if you think about it, it does make the game go by a lot quicker since, if you don't care about the story, you just don't have to worry about going to towns and talking to people and shit. But it's just a really weird thing to take out, but whatever. Anyways, so the Japanese version does have very little story and I will explain that. So there is a young prince named Jerry Bean, and you have a brother named Tom Bean, and he just happens to be an asshole. Because you're the one who's supposed to marry Princess Emmy, but instead what he ends up doing is that he ends up hiring a wizard to turn you into a blob that kinda looks like the one from Dragon Quest. So not only you're trying to get your normal form back, but you also gotta kick the wizard's ass and your brother's ass as well. It's very simplistic stuff, but like I said, it just seems kinda weird that they removed it out of the English one. So now, let's move on and start talking about the gameplay. So in this platformer, whenever you jump on most enemies, you actually ride on them instead, much like in Super Mario Bros. 2. And you can open up flowers to get certain power-ups. So the typical one is a red ball that you just get to shoot at people. Then there are some that make you jump higher, and then there's an iron ball that you have unlimited amount of as long as you pick it back up, but it makes you move really slow. And you can lay down a vine that you can climb up on to reach higher places. Also in this game, you collect letters to spell out the word Jerry, and if you collect them all in the level, it gives you 2 extra lives. But one interesting mechanic that this game has is that if you hold down the run button and you go onto a wall, you can actually climb up the wall. Same thing can be done with ceilings. And there's quite a few hidden areas within the game where you will need to use these techniques. So the only way you can defend yourself within this game is by shooting the balls, or if you go on top of them and hold down. But usually the holding down thing doesn't work on all of them, but for the most part it does work on a lot of the smaller ones. And every 2 levels there is a boss fight. So other than those mechanics that I mentioned, everything else is pretty typical stuff, just going from point A to point B. But one nice feature is that once you do beat a level, you can play it over again if you really want to, like if you want to get like more lives and such. But one thing that is really weird with this game is that you have 3 heart containers, but only 2 of them are full. It just seems kind of weird why you'd only start with 2 hearts instead of 3. Like, imagine if there was a beat 'em up where you start off with only half your health, it would just seem a bit stupid. I don't consider it to be a big complaint, but it's just really odd. So now, let's start moving on and start talking about the controls. And the controls in this game are okay. So the button layout is really easy to understand. You have like the run button and the jump button, and you also got the attack button, which happens to be the shoulder buttons. So that's all well and good, but I do find that the moving within this game just could have been a lot better. So the default walking speed is way too slow, but when you're running, you're not only way too fast, but you're also really slippery. Because a lot of the times, you're always going to be overshooting jumps. And one thing that's really annoying is that sometimes you'll be in a small area, and sometimes your character will end up sticking to walls when you really don't mean to. And sometimes trying to make the right momentum to jump at certain places is just a lot more harder than it needs to be. Especially the part with the falling logs, which is another thing that kind of takes references from Super Mario Bros. 2. But only that this one is just a lot more pain in the ass. So with that said, the controls in this game are not the best, but they're also not the worst thing either. That's why I think they're okay. They're not great, but they're not bad. So now let's start moving on to the other things, like the graphics. And for a pretty early Super Nintendo game, this actually does look quite good. The game has a lot of bright colors, which is very appealing and also suits the game really well, cause this is a pretty happy looking game. The character designs are alright, nothing too crazy, but they at least do the job. But I really do like the level design within this game. Although there is one thing about the level design that I don't like, but I'll get to it later there because it's not so much the level design's fault, it has to do with something else. But for the most part, I really don't have much complaints about the graphics. Now sure, it's not the best looking Super Nintendo game ever, but I do think it does look pretty good, especially for 1992 standards. And as for the game's music, I think it's alright. I don't find it to be very memorable, but it does suit the game really well. A lot of the songs sound very upbeat, or they sound good with the setting that it belongs to. But I don't think this game has any bad music, I just don't think it's like the greatest thing ever. Like I said, it's not really memorable, like it's not something I would listen to on my free time, but it is something that does suit with the game. So that is why I do find that the music within this one is just alright. So now, if you want to buy this game, it's actually a really cheap game. The lowest I've seen it for was $8, and the highest I've seen it for was $15, but for the most part it usually goes between 8, 10, and 12. Which I do consider to be a pretty good price if I say so myself. But I don't recall ever seeing this game out and about, but I'm pretty sure I might have, I just can't remember, but I just don't remember seeing it anytime recently. But I can tell that this game is a pretty common one, so if you do want to own it, at least this one is going to be an easy one to find and it's not going to cost you much. Which is always a good thing that it is affordable. So now, before I get into my overall thoughts, there is one thing I did mention I wanted to mention here, and yes, personally, I found this to be the biggest flaw within the game. So once you get into a level and you pick up a power-up, let's just say the jumping one, and let's say you died at a certain part because you made a mistake. So once you respawn and you go back to the same part where you found that jumping power up, it won't be there anymore. And the reason why I think this fucking sucks is because there are certain areas where you actually need like a jumping power up or a plant power up or anything like that. But if you want to know how you're supposed to get the jumping power up back onto that same spot, is that you have to get yourself a game over and try the entire level again from the beginning. Which is just fucking idiotic. But the one good thing is that at least in this game there is unlimited continue, so even if you get game over like 500 times, you're not going to start from all the way back at the beginning of the game. Like if that were the case, then this game would be broken. Well, thankfully it's not like that, but it's still very frustrating. So if it's your first time in that level, or if it's your first time getting respawned after a game over, and you pick up the power up that is needed, then you only have one chance. And if you screw up, you just gotta get yourself a game over and try again, which just seems really dumb. So personally, I found that to be the worst part of the game. And now with that rant over with, for my overall thoughts on this game, I think it's an okay game. Not great, but not horrible. Like, there's a few things within this game I really do like quite a bit. Like, I like the concept, I like some of the mechanics. The level design is good, except for that whole thing that I ranted about, but the controls in this game do need a little bit of work. And as I said, they're not the worst controls ever, but they're just not as good as you think they would be. Like, they are pretty responsive, it's just the walking is too slow and the running is too slippery. But at least this game is still better than stupid fucking Impossible on the TurboGrafx, which is a platforming game that I took a look at somewhat recently. But yeah, personally, I'd say this game is at least better than that. So I wouldn't say Smart Ball is actually a smart ball, but I wouldn't say it's a dumb ball either. I'd say it's more like it's an average ball. But before I end it here, there's actually one thing that is pretty interesting I'd like to mention, is that there is actually supposed to be a sequel to this game released on the Super Nintendo, but it never happened. Now, I have heard two different reasons why the game was cancelled. The first reason that most people believe is that it had to do with the relationship between Sony and Nintendo, and we all knew what came of that, the PlayStation. And the other reason that I hear about it being cancelled was that Sony ended the production of the game very early on because they just weren't satisfied with it, since there is a beta of the ROM of it that you can try out. So with that said, Smart Ball is just an average ball, and I'd only recommend it if you're really big into platformers, but even then, it's not the best one you'll ever play, but it's also not the worst one you'll ever play. So that'll be all for this review, so thank you for watching, commenting, and have yourselves a great day.